name is Cassandra Sharp. I'm 42, and I've spent the last 3 years learning that family loyalty doesn't always flow both ways, especially when they think you're nothing more than a glorified security guard. The call came at 0430 on a Tuesday. My grandfather, the man who raised me after my parents died in a car crash when I was 8, had suffered a massive stroke. The doctors at Methodist Hospital in Dallas gave him maybe 48 hours. I was in Afghanistan at the time, overseeing a classified operation that had taken 18 months to plan, but family is family. Within 6 hours, I was on a transport plane home, my heart heavy with the weight of unfinished business on 2 continents. What I didn't expect was walking into a family reunion that felt more like a tribunal. The Sharp family had always been complicated. My grandfather, Robert Sharp, was a Korean War veteran who'd built a small construction empire from nothing. When he took me in, his 3 adult children, my uncles Tommy and Dale and my Aunt Patricia, made it clear I was Charity, the orphaned granddaughter who'd never amount to much. They tolerated me because Grandpa insisted, but they never let me forget I was the outsider looking in. Growing up, family gatherings were exercises in humiliation. While my cousins talked about their accomplishments, Tommy Jr., law degree, Patricia's daughter becoming a doctor, Dale's son taking over the family business, I was the girl who played soldier. That's what they called it when I enlisted at 18, playing soldier. Cassie's always been a dreamer, Aunt Patricia would tell anyone who'd listen. Thinks the military is gonna make something of her. Poor thing doesn't realize she's just gonna end up guarding some gate somewhere. Uncle Tommy, a personal injury lawyer with a God complex, was worse. The military preys on kids like her. He'd pontificate over holiday dinners. Promise them the world, use them up, spit them out. Mark my words, she'll be back here in 4 years with nothing to show for it but a bad back and PTSD. They never asked about my assignments, never inquired about my training, never bothered to learn that I'd been selected for officer candidate school or that I'd graduated second in my class. To them, I was still the scared 8-year-old girl clutching a teddy bear at their father's kitchen table. The only person who believed in me was Grandpa. He'd been a sergeant in Korea, saw real combat, and understood what service meant. But even he didn't know the full extent of what I'd accomplished. The nature of my work required it. I'd started as a second lieutenant in military intelligence, but my aptitude for languages and pattern recognition caught the attention of some very serious people very quickly. By age 25, I was running human intelligence operations in Eastern Europe. By 30, I was coordinating multi-agency counterterrorism efforts across 3 time zones. And by 35, I'd been promoted to Brigadier General, the youngest woman in Army history to achieve that rank. But my family didn't know any of that. My cover story, maintained for operational security, was that I was a logistics coordinator stationed at various bases around the world. It sounded boring, unimportant, exactly the kind of job they expected their charity case to land. The irony was that their dismissal made my cover more believable. Who would suspect that quiet, unremarkable Cassie Sharp was briefing the Joint Chiefs of Staff and carrying nuclear launch codes? Walking into that hospital waiting room after 3 years overseas, I wasn't prepared for the wall of hostility that hit me. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Uncle Dale said without looking up from his phone. He was thicker around the middle now, his hair grayer, but his sneer was exactly the same. "Dale," I said quietly, setting down my travel bag. The waiting room was standard hospital beige, filled with uncomfortable chairs and the antiseptic smell of institutional cleaning supplies. My family had claimed a corner near the windows. Tommy and his wife Jennifer, Dale and his wife Susan, Patricia and her husband Richard, plus assorted cousins I barely recognized. 3 years, Cassie," Aunt Patricia said, her voice dripping with theatrical hurt. 3 years without so much as a phone call, and now you show up when he's dying? "I was overseas," I said simply. "You know that." Uncle Tommy, still the family spokesman after all these years, leaned forward in his chair. He was wearing a 3-piece suit, even though it was barely dawn, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the circumstances. "Overseas doing what, exactly? You never tell us anything." For all we know, you've been sitting in some air-conditioned office in Germany stamping papers." "My work is classified," I said, the same response I'd been giving for 20 years. Dale snorted. "Classified, right, that's what they tell all the paper pushers to make them feel important. You know what I think?" Patricia leaned forward, her voice taking on that particular tone she used when she was about to deliver what she considered a devastating truth. "I think you've been ashamed. Ashamed that you never amounted to anything, so you stayed away. And now you're back because you think there might be money involved." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Several cousins shifted uncomfortably, but no one contradicted her. I looked around the room at these people who shared my blood but had never bothered to know me. They saw a woman in civilian clothes. Jeans, a simple black sweater, no makeup, who'd walked away from their version of success to play soldier for 2 decades. They had no idea that the phone in my pocket contained direct lines to the Pentagon, that the watch on my wrist was a secure communication device, or that I'd spent the last 18 months hunting war criminals across 3 continents. "How's Grandpa?" I asked instead of defending myself. "Like you care," Dale muttered. Tommy's wife Jennifer, who'd always been the kindest of the in-laws, spoke up quietly. "He's stable, but the damage is extensive. The doctors say we should prepare ourselves." I nodded, feeling a familiar weight settle in my chest. I'd lost soldiers under my command, good people who'd trusted me to bring them home. But this was different. This was the man who'd taught me to drive a stick shift in his old pickup truck, who'd sat through every school play and graduation ceremony, who'd never once made me feel like a burden. "Can I see him?" I asked. "Family only," Patricia said quickly. The doctors were very clear. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. After everything, after losing my parents, after 24 years of service to my country, after flying halfway around the world to be here, they were going to exclude me from saying goodbye. "She is family," Jennifer said quietly, earning a sharp look from her husband. "She's barely family," Patricia snapped. "She shows up once every few years when it's convenient, never calls, never writes. Real family shows up. Real family stays involved. Real family," Tommy added, "doesn't abandon their responsibilities to go play G.I. Jane halfway around the world." That's when something inside me shifted. I'd spent decades protecting people who despised me, hunting terrorists who wanted to destroy everything I'd sworn to defend, making impossible choices in impossible situations. I'd sacrificed marriages, friendships, any chance at a normal life, all in service of something greater than myself. And these people, these small, petty, vindictive people, thought I was a failure. "You're right," I said quietly. "Real family does show up." I pulled out my phone and made a call, not to a friend or a supervisor, but to a number that would route through 3 different security protocols before reaching its destination. "This is General Sharp," I said, using my full rank for the first time in their presence. The words felt strange in this context, too big for this beige waiting room with its fluorescent lights and worn carpet. "I need emergency compacification leave extended indefinitely. Authorization November 7 Alpha." The room had gone completely silent. Even Dale had looked up from his phone. I continued speaking in the crisp, professional tone I used for operational briefings. "Also, I need a security detail dispatched to Methodist Hospital, Dallas. Standard protection protocol for a flag officer attending a family emergency. ETA 30 minutes. I ended the call and looked around the room at faces frozen in confusion and dawning realization. "General?" Tommy's wife whispered. "Brigadier General," I corrected gently. "U.S. Army. Currently attached to the Defense Intelligence Agency, though my specific assignment is classified above your clearance level." Patricia's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. Dale had gone very pale. Tommy, the lawyer who always had something to say, seemed to have lost the power of speech entirely. "The paper stamping I've been doing for the past 3 years," I continued conversationally, "involved coordinating intelligence operations across 17 countries. Last month, I briefed the president on a counterterrorism operation that prevented what would have been the largest attack on American soil since 9/11. The month before that, I testified before a closed session of the Senate Intelligence Committee regarding war crimes tribunals for 3 high-value targets we captured in Syria. I paused, letting that sink in. But you're right about one thing, Aunt Patricia, I have been ashamed. Ashamed that I've spent my entire adult life protecting a country that includes people who judge others without knowing the first thing about their service or sacrifice. The elevator dinged, and a woman in a crisp Navy uniform stepped out, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen had been my aide-de-camp for the past 18 months, and she moved with the precise efficiency of someone accustomed to handling sensitive situations. "General Sharp," she said, approaching with a slight nod. "I have the briefing materials you requested, and the SecDef wants to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Something about the situation in Yemen." "Thank you, Commander. Has the detail been established?" "Yes, ma'am. 2 agents remain with the vehicle, and hospital security has been briefed on protocols. We've also coordinated with local law enforcement as required for flag officer protection. It was all unnecessary, of course. I wasn't in any danger in a Dallas hospital. But the optics were important, and sometimes optics were everything." My family watched this exchange with the fascination of people observing an alien species. These were the same people who'd spent decades treating me like an embarrassment, and now they were seeing me give orders to armed federal agents. "There's been a misunderstanding," I said, turning back to my relatives. "I don't need anyone's permission to see my grandfather. As his next of kin with power of attorney, yes, Uncle Tommy, I have legal documents you can review. I'll be making all medical decisions going forward." Tommy's legal mind finally kicked in. Next of kin? That would be his children. Would be his children if they'd bothered to maintain legal standing? I interrupted. "But since none of you have visited him in the past year, and since I've been managing his finances and medical care through a third-party trust, legal authority defaults to me?" This wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough, and I knew they wouldn't challenge it immediately. More importantly, Commander Chen had handed me a tablet containing actual classified briefing materials that required immediate attention. The Yemen situation wasn't a fabrication. "I'm going to see Grandpa now," I announced. "Alone. When I'm finished, we can discuss visiting schedules and medical decisions like civilized adults. Commander Chen will remain here to ensure you have everything you need." I walked toward the ICU, leaving my family in various states of shock and confusion. Behind me, I could hear Patricia whispering frantically to her husband, Dale trying to process what he'd just witnessed, and Tommy, still the lawyer, probably trying to figure out if there was some angle he could work. But none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was the old man lying in the bed at the end of the hall, surrounded by machines and monitors, fighting his last battle. Grandpa looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the stroke and the years I'd been away. His hair was completely white now, his face gaunt. But when I took his hand, his eyes opened, and for just a moment they were clear. "Cassie?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Grandpa." "You came back." "I always come back," I said, squeezing his hand gently. "That's what soldiers do." He smiled then, the same smile I remembered from childhood. "I knew you'd make something of yourself, sweetheart. I always knew." He died 6 hours later, with me holding his hand and Commander Chen maintaining a discreet vigil by the door. His last words were about a fishing trip we'd taken when I was 12, when he taught me to tie proper knots and told me that the measure of a person wasn't what they achieved, but how they treated others when they thought no one was watching. The funeral 3 days later was a different affair entirely. Word had gotten out, somehow it always does, that the deceased's granddaughter was a general. Not just any general, but one of the youngest in Army history, with a list of classified accomplishments that made the local news and drew attention from military personnel across the region. The service was held at First Presbyterian, the same church where I'd been baptized after coming to live with Grandpa. But instead of the modest family affair everyone had planned, it became something approaching a state funeral. A full honor guard from Fort Hood. A 21-gun salute. Bagpipers. The mayor. 2 congressmen. and media coverage that my family was completely unprepared to handle. I wore my dress blues with full decorations for the first time in their presence. The ribbons alone told a story my family had never bothered to learn: bronze star with oak leaf cluster, Purple Heart, Defense Superior Service Medal, Combat Action Badge, Master Parachutist Badge, and at the top, the pale blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor, though that particular story remained classified. During the eulogy, Patricia kept glancing over at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Tommy sat ramrod straight, probably calculating how this would affect his standing in the community. Dale just looked confused, like he was still trying to reconcile the woman in general's uniform with the niece he'd dismissed for decades. But it was after the service, at the graveside ceremony, that the moment I'd been unconsciously waiting for finally arrived. As the honor guard finished folding the flag, the senior NCO, a master sergeant with 30 years of service, approached me with the crisp military bearing that comes from a lifetime of discipline and respect. "General Sharp," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet cemetery, "on behalf of a grateful nation and the United States Army, please accept this flag in honor of your grandfather's service and sacrifice, and in recognition of your own distinguished career defending our freedom." The words were standard, part of every military funeral, but there was something extra in his tone, a recognition between warriors that transcended rank or ceremony. "Thank you, Sergeant Major," I replied, accepting the flag. He would have been proud. "Ma'am, if I may," the Sergeant Major continued, his voice dropping slightly, "it's been an honor serving under your command, even indirectly. The men and women of the 3rd Infantry Division still talk about Operation Iron Justice, what you accomplished in Syria." "Thank you, Sergeant Major," I said quietly, cutting him off before he could reveal more classified information. "That's very kind. But the damage, if you could call it that, was done." Operation Iron Justice had been classified, but portions had been declassified just enough to make the military community aware that someone had pulled off something extraordinary. The fact that this senior NCO recognized me, knew my work, and respected it enough to break protocol at a funeral spoke volumes about my reputation within the Army. Behind me, I could hear Tommy whispering frantically to Jennifer, "What's Operation Iron Justice? What was she doing in Syria?" After the ceremony, as people began to disperse, my family lingered awkwardly near the gravesite. They'd spent the entire day watching strangers treat me with a level of respect and deference they'd never imagined, listening to conversations about classified operations and strategic briefings, observing as ranking officials sought me out to pay their respects. Finally, Uncle Tommy approached me. The man who'd spent decades predicting my failure, who'd mocked my choices and dismissed my service, was now standing before a decorated general at his own father's funeral. "Cassie," he said, and for the first time in my memory, his voice held no condescension. I think we need to talk." "Do we?" I asked mildly, still holding Grandpa's flag. "We didn't know," Patricia said, stepping forward. Her earlier hostility had been replaced by something that might have been shame. "You never told us you were, we had no idea you were so important?" I suggested. She winced. Successful. I looked at these people who'd shaped my childhood with their casual cruelty and dismissive attitudes. They were smaller now, diminished not by age but by the realization of their own ignorance and prejudice. "You're right," I said finally. "You didn't know. But you never asked either. You never cared enough to find out who I really was or what I'd accomplished. You were content to believe the worst because it fit your narrative about the orphan granddaughter who'd never amount to anything." Dale shifted uncomfortably. "We were protecting you, Cassie. The military, we thought you were making a mistake." "You thought I was making a mistake," I corrected, "because you couldn't imagine that someone from this family could achieve something extraordinary. You couldn't conceive that the little girl you pitied might grow up to brief presidents and hunt terrorists and earn the respect of her peers. Tommy, ever the lawyer, tried a different approach. But why didn't you tell us? Why maintain the charade about being a logistics coordinator?" I smiled then, not with warmth, but with the cold satisfaction of someone who'd finally found the perfect moment to deliver a truth that had been years in the making. Because my work required operational security, I said. Because there are people in this world who would kill my family members to get to me. Because every person who knows my real identity becomes a potential target, a potential liability, a potential weakness that enemies can exploit. I paused, letting that sink in. But mostly, I continued, I maintain the charade because it never occurred to me that you deserve to know. Why would I share the most important parts of my life with people who spent decades making it clear they thought I was worthless? The words hung in the air like smoke from the rifle salute. Around us, the cemetery was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of wind through the oak trees Grandpa had loved. That's not fair, Patricia said weakly. Fair, I repeated. Was it fair when you excluded me from family decisions because I was just the charity case? Was it fair when you told everyone I was playing soldier instead of pursuing a real career? Was it fair when you tried to keep me from seeing Grandpa in the hospital because I wasn't real family? None of them had an answer for that. Commander Chen approached from a discreet distance. General, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a secure call from CENTCOM. Priority Alpha. Of course, I said. Priority Alpha meant someone, somewhere, was in immediate danger and needed my expertise to stay alive. It meant leaving this confrontation unfinished, but that seemed appropriate somehow. I turned back to my family one last time. Grandpa knew who I was, I said quietly. He knew because he cared enough to ask, to listen, to be proud of me even when he couldn't understand the details. That's the difference between him and all of you. I walked toward the waiting car, leaving them standing by the grave with their regrets and their newfound respect and their complete inability to undo 24 years of casual dismissal and contempt. 3 days later, I was back in Afghanistan, coordinating a rescue operation for a downed pilot behind enemy lines. The operation was successful. Sergeant Williams made it home to his family in Ohio with all limbs intact and a story he'd never be allowed to tell. But late that night, in my quarters at Bagram Air Base, I received an email from Jennifer, Tommy's wife. She was the only one who'd had my contact information, the only one who'd ever made an effort to maintain some connection across the years and miles. Cassie, she wrote, I know this might not mean much now, but I want you to know that we're proud of you. We've always been proud of you, even when we were too stupid or stubborn to show it properly. Your grandfather used to brag about you all the time, about your promotions, your deployments, your awards. He never told us the details, because he said it wasn't his story to tell. But he made sure we knew you were doing something important, something that mattered. The rest of us were just too caught up in our own small lives to pay attention. That's on us, not you. I hope someday you can forgive us for not being the family you deserved. And I hope you know that Robert Sharp died knowing his granddaughter had become exactly the kind of person he'd raised her to be. I never responded to that email. There was nothing to say that hadn't already been said at a graveside in Dallas, nothing to add that would change the fundamental truth of our relationship. But 6 months later, when I was promoted to Major General and given command of all intelligence operations in the Middle East theater, I did send flowers to Patricia's daughter when she graduated medical school. And when Dale's son got married, I made sure he received a congratulatory note on official Department of Defense letterhead. Not because I'd forgiven them exactly, but because Grandpa had taught me that the measure of a person wasn't what they achieved, but how they treated others when they thought no one was watching. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's worth being the bigger person, even when no one's watching at all.